Okay, the next topic is pulmonary ventilation. This means how the air goes in and outside your lungs. The main muscle for inspiration and expiration is going to be the diaphragm, right? The diaphragm moves up and down, and that allows us to breathe. However, we are not breathing in and out like when we are sitting down, for example, in the class, and that's the only way we do it. No, we also run, we also laugh, we also take a deep breath, and because of that we need to use other muscles as well, not just the diaphragm. That's what you see right here in this figure. Yes, the diaphragm is the main one, but depending on the type of situation that we have, the rectus abdominis will work, internal intercostals, external intercostals, the sternocleidomastoid, depending again on the type of situation. So if we scroll down, we can see in the respiratory muscles, we already talked about it. And right there you have neural control of breathing. Why? Because we know that in order for us to move a muscle, we need a nerve. Different areas of the brain are going to be in charge of different things. Right here, you can see that the area of the brain that takes care of the muscles that allow us to breathe are going to be in the brainstem. In the brainstem, you're going to have, therefore, respiratory centers. So which ones are these respiratory centers? You have ventral respiratory group, dorsal respiratory group, and the pontine group. The ventral respiratory group basically moves the muscles. So you can see here, you see ventral, sends the information down to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord it goes into the muscles. This is like the engine. Like in your car, the speed at which your engine runs can be modified with the gas or the brake. Same thing. This is going to be modified by other centers, such as dorsal respiratory group and the pontine respiratory group. This dorsal respiratory group is modified or is affected by the changes that we find in our blood. Remember that in the blood vessels chapter, there were aortic bodies, carotid bodies at the level of the blood vessels, and they capture the chemical composition of the blood. That chemical composition goes all the way up to your brain into this dorsal respiratory group, and the dorsal respiratory group will adjust the ventral respiratory group in order to make us breathe faster or slower. Same concept. We have central chemoreceptors. Central chemoreceptors, for example, are going to capture the information that we have in the cerebrospinal fluid. If there's changes, for example, in pH in the cerebrospinal fluid, they will modify the dorsal respiratory group, and the dorsal respiratory group will modify the ventral respiratory group so we can change the speed at which we are going to breathe. The pontine respiratory group is the one that is controlled by basically the brain. In cases like when we laugh, sometimes we breathe faster. So then there are areas that our brain controls, and in order for us to breathe faster or slower, the brain uses the pontine respiratory group in order to adjust the dorsal respiratory group, and the dorsal respiratory group adjusts the ventral respiratory group, so the ventral respiratory group can change and modify how we breathe. Okay, let's keep scrolling down, and right there you have the same information that I just mentioned. We have 3 respiratory centers in the brainstem: ventral respiratory group, dorsal respiratory group, and pontine respiratory group. I already explained that. Central and peripheral input. Remember I told you that these centers are going to modify the way we breathe according to the changes that are necessary due to changes in pH or carbon dioxide, etc. Because of that, we have central chemoreceptors. Remember I told you these are changes that may happen in cerebrospinal fluid. Peripheral chemoreceptors, as I was telling you, this is what we have in the blood vessels. Well, there you go. You see, carotid bodies, aortic bodies, and that's what we have seen already in the blood vessels chapter. If we keep scrolling down, in addition to those, we also have stretch receptors as well as irritant receptors. Sometimes, when some irritants go into your lung, you start coughing because obviously that needs to be adjusted in order for us to remove these irritants if it's possible. Okay, the next topic is voluntary control. As you can see, you can hold your breath. So then breathing is voluntary. Okay, so the next thing is pressure, resistance, and airflow. This is very important because this is going to explain how the air goes inside our lungs and how the air goes outside our lungs. So how do we get the air inside our lungs? Inspiration. So if in your lungs and outside your lung there is pressure, the pressure in both places is going to be the same because they have communication between. What happens is when you inhale, your diaphragm goes down. When the diaphragm goes down, the volume in the lungs increase. When the volume in the lungs increase, the pressure of gases decrease. So if the pressure outside is 10, the pressure inside your lung is 10. What happens if your diaphragm goes down? The size of your lungs increase. Since the size of your lungs increase, the pressure is going to be less. Let's say 5. So then the air outside your lungs is 10. Because of the diaphragm goes down, now the pressure in here is 5. Now the air moves from high pressure 10 to low pressure 5. And that's how the air goes inside your lung. The opposite happens in expiration. If this is 10 and this is 5, when the diaphragm relaxes, the diaphragm goes up, the thorax recoils back and then this pressure in your lungs increases, and now you're having here, let's say, more pressure than outside, and that drives the air out from the lungs. So let's keep scrolling down. Respiration, I already explained that.